Welcome back. It's me, your host, Messiah Day, and we're going to go into part 3 of the history of the papacy. I left off near the bottom of this page where it was the precursor of the downfall of the papal church. So we're going to start off right here. It's idolatry. Idolatry at first was one, and necessarily so, for it drew its existence from the same spring which were seated in the depths of the early ages. But though one originally in process of time, it took different forms and was known by different names. In several countries, the Magian philosophy had long prevailed in the East. In the West had risen the polytheism of Rome, while in Greece, forming the link between Asia and Africa, and combining the contemplative and subtle character of the Eastern idolatries with the grossness of latitudinarianism of those of the West. There flourished a highly imaginative but sensuous mythology. As these idolatries were one in their essence, so they were one in their tendency, and the tendency of all was to draw away the heart from God, to him in the visions of man by objects of sense, and to create a strong relish for the contemplation of a spiritual being, and a strong incapacity for the apprehension and retention of spiritual and abstract truth. These idolatries had long since passed their prime, but the powerful bent they had given to the human mind still existed. It was only by a slow process of counteraction that the evil bias could be overcome. So long had these superstitions brooded over the earth, and so largely had they impregnated the soil with their evil principles, that their eradication could not be looked for but by a long and painful conflict on the part of Christianity. It would be expected that after the first flush of the gospel's triumph, that there would become a recoil, that the ancient idolatries, recovering from their panic, would rally their forces and appear again, not in any of their old forms, for neither does superstition nor the gospel ever revive under exactly its old organizations, but under a new form, adapted to the state of the world and the character of the new antagonist now to be confronted, and that Satan would make a last and, of course, unexampled struggle before surrendering to Christ, the empire of the world. It would be expected also in the coming conflict that all these idolatries would combine into one phallic. It was extremely probable that the animosities and the rivalship which had hitherto kept them apart would cease, that the school and sect into which they had been divided would coalesce, that recognizing in Christianity an antagonist that was like the foe of them all. The common danger would make them feel their common brotherhood, and thus that all these false systems would come to be united into one comprehensive and enormous system, containing within itself all principles of hostility and all the elements of strength formerly scattered throughout them all, and that in this combined and united form they would do battle with the truth. You hear that, folks? They say they're going to do battle with the truth. The idols, all these idols are going to come together. All these idolatries would combine into one phallic. Who could that be? Just moving on. It was not long till symptoms began to appear of such a move on the part of Satan, of such a resuscitation of the ancient paganism. The shadow began to grow back on the dial of time. The spiritual began to lose ground before the symbolic and the mythological. The various idolatries which had formerly covered the wide space which the gospel now occupied, subjugated, but not utterly exterminated, began to pay court to Christianity. They professed, as the handmaids, to do damage to the mistress, but their design in this insidious friendship was not to aid her in her glorious mission, but to borrow her help and so reign in her room. Well, they knew that they had been overtaken by that disreputable which sooner or later overtakes all that is sprung of earth, but they thought to draw fresh vitality from the living side of Christianity, and so rid themselves of the burden of their anility. The Magian religion wooed her in the east. Paganism paid court to her in the west. Judaism too, esteeming doubtless that it had a better right than either, but in its claim to be recognized, each brought her something of its own, which it pretended was necessary to the perfection of Christianity. Judaism brought her dead symbols. The Magians and Greek philosophers brought her refined and subtle, but dead speculations and doctrine. And the pagans of Rome brought her dead divinities. On all hands was she tempted to part with the substance and to embrace again the shadow. Thus did the old idolatries muster under the banner of Christianity. They railed into her support, so they professed, but in reality, to unite their arms for her overthrow. The two things might have been expected to happen. First, that the rising corruption would reach its maturest proportions in that country where external influences most favored its development. And second, that when developed, it would exhibit the master's traits and leading peculiarities of each of the ancient paganisms. Both these anticipations were exactly realized. It was not in Chaldea, nor in Egypt, the seats of the Magian philosophers, nor was it in Greece that Papacy arose, for these countries not retain little besides the traditions of their former power. It was in the soil of the 7 hills, amid the trophies of the unnumbered victories, the symbols of universal empire. Let's look at 7 hills, ancient 7 hills. C-I-E-N-T, 7 hills. Oh, ancient Rome, look at that. Of the 7 hills of current Rome, 5, the Aventine, the Celine, the Equestrian, the Perennial, and the Viminal hills, are populated with monuments, buildings, and parks. The Capitoline Hill now hosts Rome's City Hall, and the Palatine Hill belongs to the main archaeological area. Let's get some images. The seat of Satan is in these 7 hills. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Said, it was in the soil of the 7 hills, amid the trophies of the unnumbered victories, the symbols of universal empire, and the gorgeous rites of a polluting polytheism, that Romanism, Velut Abar Ovo, grew up by a law similar to that which guided the seed to the spot best fitted for its germination. Did the modern paganism strike its roots in the soil, which the ancient paganism had most largely impregnated with its influence and tendencies? The surrounding heresies were speedily overshadowed and dwarfed. The Gnostics and other errors declined in proportion in which Romanism waxed in stature. Its mighty trunk joined to itself all those corrupt influences which would otherwise have afforded nourishment to them. In process of time, they disappeared, though rather through a process of absorption than of extinction. So they absorbed into whatever they was doing, and they didn't wipe them out. The result presents us with a sort of pantheism, the only sort of pantheism that is real, in which the inspiring idolatries returned into the bosom of their parent divinity and had their existence prolonged in its existence. The papacy is a new Babel. You hear that? The papacy is a new Babel. Let's highlight it so everybody can see that. The papacy is a new Babel, in in which the old redoubtable idolatries are the builders. It is a spiritual pantheon in which the local and vagrant superstitions find again a center and a home. It is a grand mausoleum in which the corpses of the defunct paganisms, like the mummied monks of Kurtzburg, are laid out in ghastly pomps, while their disembodied spirits still live in Papacy and govern the world from their grave. Analyze Papacy, and you will find all these ancient systems existing in it. The Magian philosophy flourished anew under the monastic system, for in the conventional life of Rome we find that the contemplative moods and the ascetic habits which so largely prevailed in Egypt and over all the East. And here, too, we find the fundamental principles of that philosophy, namely, that the flesh is the seat of evil, and consequently that it becomes a duty to weaken and mortify the body. In Papacy, we find the predominating traits of the Grecian philosophy, more especially in the subtle casuistry of the Popish schools, combined with a sensuous ritual, the celebration of which is often accompanied, as in Greece of old, with gross lasciviousness, and last of all, there is palpably present in Papacy the polytheism of ancient Rome, in the gods and goddesses which, under the title of saints, fill up the calendar and crowd the temple of the Romish Church. Here, then, all the old idolatries live over again. There is nothing new about them but the organization, which is more perfect and complete than ever. To add one another's illustration to those already given, the Papacy is a gigantic realization of our Lord's parables. The Roman Empire, on the introduction of Christianity, was swept and garnished. The unclean spirit which inhabited it had been driven out of it, but the demon had never wandered far from the region of the seven hills. And finding no rest, he returned, bringing with him 7 other spirits more wicked than himself, which took possession of their old abode, and made its last state worse than its first. The name of Papacy truly is Legion. There is many antichrists, said Apostle John, for in his days the various systems of error had not been combined into one, but the Roman apostasy acquired ultimately the dominion, and marshaling the other heresies beneath its banner, gave its own name to the motley host, and became known as the Antichrist of prophecy and of history. Papacy men we hold to be an aftergrowth of paganism, whose deadly wound, dealt by the spiritual sword of Christianity, was healed. Its oracles had been silenced, its shrine demolished, and its God consigned to oblivion. But the deep corruption of the human race, not yet cured by the promised infusion of the Spirit upon all flesh, revived it anew, and under a Christian mass reared other temples into its honor. But it another pantheon built it another pantheon, and replenished it with other gods, which in fact were but the ancient divinities under new names. All idolatries, in whatever age and country they had existed, are to be viewed but as successive developments of the one grand apostasy: Satan, Lucifer, Moloch, Baphomet. They are all the same. The apostasy was commenced in Eden and consummated at Rome. It had its rise in the plucking of the forbidden fruit. Us, man, was the prohibited. I can't even say the word. I can't even say the word. Prohibited fruit. Forbidden fruit. Forbidden fruit. I'm sorry. It had its rise in the plucking of the forbidden fruit, and it attained its acme in the supremacy of the Bishop of Rome. Its acme in the supremacy of the Bishop of Rome. Christ, vicar on earth. The hope that he would be as God led man to commit the first sin, and that sin was perfecting when the Pope exalted himself above all that is God, or that is worship, so that he, as God, sitteth in the temple of God, showing himself that he is God. Papacy is but the natural development of this great original transgression. It is just the early idolatry ripened and perfected. It is the manifestly and enormous expansion of the same intensely malignant and fearfully destructive principle which these idolatries contain. The ancient Chaldeans worshipped the sun. The Greeks defied the power of nature, defying the power of nature, and the Romans exalting the race of primeval men into gods, are but varied manifestations of the same evil principle, namely the utter alienation of the heart from God. Its proneness to hide itself amid the darkness of its own corrupt imaginations, and to become a god unto itself. That principle received at the most fearful development which appears possible on earth in the mysteries of iniquity, which came to be seated on the 7 hills. For therein man defied himself, became God, nay, arrogated powers which lifted him high above God. Papacy is the last, the most mature, the most subtle, the most skillfully contriving and the most essentially diabolical form of idolatry which the world ever saw, or which there is reason to believe it ever will see. It is the new plus ultra of man's wickedness, and the chief devourer of Satan's cunning and malignity. It is the greatest calamity, next to fall, which ever befell the human family. Far further away from God, the world could not exist at all. The cement that holds society together, already greatly weakened, would be altogether destroyed, and the social fabric would instantly fall into ruins. Having thus indicated the origin of Romanism, we shall attempt in 3 following chapters to trace its rise and progress. It follows from the principles taught in this chapter that the Church, so-called, of Rome had no right to rank amongst Christian churches. She is not a church, neither is her religion the Christian religion. We are accustomed to speak of Papacy as a corrupt form of Christianity. We conceded too much. The Church of Rome bears the same relationship to the Church of Christ, which the hierarchy of Baal bore to the Institute of Moses, and Papacy stands related to Christianity only in the same way in which paganism stood related to primeval revelations. Papacy is not a corruption simply, but a transformation. It may be difficult to fix the time when it passed from the one into the other, but the change is incontestable. Papacy is the gospel transubstantiated into the flesh and blood of paganism under a few of accidents of Christianity.